starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, good morning. Hello to everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Hopefully your colleagues are not affected by an internet outage. We may be missing some people. We are missing our co-presenter this morning, having some connection issues. So hopefully that will be resolved soon. Our topic today, we're presenting on US FDA Class I deadline, what to know for that. Today's presentation is being recorded, so everyone who registered will receive the link to the live recording and, of course, the slides. Computer audio is suggested, but if you're having trouble with the sound, sometimes clicking the phone call and just calling in with the code that's listed on the screen may be a better option for you. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat box. We will have a Q&A session at the end. If we run out of time, we will get back to you individually. All right, and then let's take a look at today's agenda. It's going to be, we're going to walk through some questions about UDI. We're going to do a brief definition of what is UDI, what are the US FDA UDI requirements, look at different categories of medical devices. Is your product a medical device? Do you need UDI, or does your device fall into the Class I exception categories? And then we'll follow up with how to comply and how ReTech can help. Okay. A little bit about ReTech. We specialize in the preparation, submission, and lifecycle data management of medical device UDI product info. We've been there since the beginning, over 15 years of SPL knowledge, participated in pilots and trade groups. I'm currently a member of MedTech Europe. We provide proven current compliance systems. They're 21 Part 11 compliant, over 700,000 SPLs submitted to FDA Good ID, and several thousand test records to UTMed. Actually, on an annual basis, we submit about 32% of all of the FDA Good ID SPL records, and we're currently supporting active channels for US, EU, China, and Korea, and a roadmap for additional health authorities as they publish guidances. We have helped many people in industry, over 450 medical device customers since we brought forward our UDI solutions. And that's everybody from small record holders to very large. And we also have flexible role assignments within our single source for medical devices product for in-country representatives and corporate users. So lots of flexibility on ways to set up your UDI team to support all of your health authorities wherever they may be. Okay, with that, we're going to go into a little bit about Mr. Sainer. He's our Senior Manager of Information Solutions. He's a subject matter expert on UDI and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He's been with us quite a while. He's got over 30 years of experience in software development. And he's the co-chair of the industry's SPL technical team. He's on the advisory board of the Medical Devices Group. And unfortunately, Patti Shragher has not been able to join us. She's a senior account executive with ReTech Life Sciences. And Patti does lots of stuff, loves problem solving. She's multilingual. She's got business development experience in both the US and international. So hopefully her connection will be resolved sometime during this hour, and she will be able to join us a little bit. All right, with that, let's launch into the first question. Gary, if you can give us a definition about unique device identification UDI.
Yeah, thanks, Angela, and welcome everyone to the webinar. We'll try to get a little bit of a definition covered here in the beginning. If those in the audience had any experience with Class 3s and Class 2s with the FDA, this is very well known to you, and it's going to be a little bit of a recap. But we do expect a good portion of the audience to be connected with Class 1s and only manufacturer Class 1s. So if you had some experience 3 or 4 years ago, if you remember that learning curve and all the acronyms and rules and regulations that were brand new to you, realize that same learning curve is now being experienced by those manufacturers that just manufacture Class I products. So to bring those individuals on board and cover a little bit of background, we're going to take a couple slides here. I'm deliberately going to work through my way rather quickly through this particular set, and then certainly you can go to some other resources at ReadTech for UDI 101 and so on. But we do feel we have to give a little bit of background so that those in the audience are able to understand some of the terms that we have. We will specialize after we cover the broad set of regulations, focus in on what is applicable to the Class I, and there's many special provisions for that. So I'm looking forward to this time of sharing. And looks like a little bit of background there, but we'll get started here with the definition for UDI. Basically, it's this identifier. It's composed of two different components, a device identifier and a production identifier. And those two together specify a unique device model and version. So that is the quick definition. It's globally unique across the world, across all time. So it's never to be reused for a different particular device. And then the other question that we get, as you mentioned there, Angela, is what are the goals? So, you know, what's all this initiative about? And we won't go through the details there, but health authorities, starting with the US FDA in the 2013 timeframe, rolled out some regulations, and it's now many health authorities around the world are picking it up, basically to improve safety, identify products to a very unique granular level. A related question is how you actually create UDI. So the actual product owner is responsible for creating the identifier based on approved standard. And they first need to generate a device identifier, and that's the mandatory fixed portion that's always present in the UDI. It identifies the labeler, so the actual manufacturer, and it points to a particular model version. The second part, a production identifier, is conditional, and it needs to be part of UDI if some of these production controls are on the label itself. So manufacturing date, expiration date, and so on. Many times they're on the product label, and then therefore that causes them to be included on the UDI. So if you simply add those two together, those two identifiers together, and remember the production identifier is conditional, so it may not be there at all. And if we flow the values down to the bottom and start building a full UDI here, you'll see a parenthesis 01 close parenthesis as a flag that tells computers, you know, that what follows is a particular device identifier. Now, I'm using GS1 standard as the example here. It's widely used, but there are other standards and similar type of concept where you code the values that follow the particular control flag. And similar flags for the values for the production identifier. So parenthesis 11 is for that manufacturing date and so on. Now, how you actually present this information, most of the time you'll see that in a linear barcode. So the full UDI device ID in red and the production ID in blue. But you might also see it in a two-dimensional matrix, and that is certainly acceptable. Standards allow that. There is a requirement that the text that is encoded in that barcode be also presented in human readable form. So you can see it on a single line, or it can be on multiple lines. And again, I had made mention to some standards. There's some alphabet soup here: GS1, HIBCC, and ICC-BBA. Excuse me. Those are all referring to industry standards that the FDA has accepted. And by the way, when you go to Europe, there's a fourth one, IFA. So the learning continues. So, Angela, I think that's a quick background. Do we want to move on to the next layer?
Yep. So let's look at summary timing and tell us about what the US FDA UDI requirements are.
All right, very good. So let's move into, this is a question that pops up quite frequently, and we'll try to do a quick summary here. This slide pulls it all together. We'll dive into some of these details in the next few slides. But as far as events that have taken place in the past, final rule established in 2013. And for this audience, as we talk about Class I products, there is a June 2020 guidance document that came out that basically extended the compliance date out to 2022 September timeframe. So that is what is currently in play right now. You've seen a bottom left the schedule of the previous classes number of years ago now. And then on the right-hand side are some descriptors of this particular project initiative that's going on. I'll leave that for you to go back and do some homework on that. If you have any questions, please connect up with us. We're going to dive into a couple of these areas about the actual regulation itself. So first of all, the regulations identify that UDI has to be placed on the product label and the package labels. It includes the full UDI, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and presented in this human readable text. Now, there is a clause in there that says if you have a date on that format, a particular label, it has to be the year dash month dash day format. The other major ruling regarding UDI is for a portion of products that fall into this category of multiple use and being reprocessed, and that has kind of narrowed down over the course of time. But if you do fall into that category, then the product needs to have a direct marking so that it's persistent, is durable, and not gets does not get removed as part of the packaging. So the UDI has to basically be carried with the product over the course of time. The third major area is reporting information to a database that health authorities generate. In this case, the FDA named theirs the Global UDI Database, so Good ID is the nickname there. And for each device, there's a number of attributes, 57 attributes that are reported, and that information, with just a couple exceptions, is made public through the National Library of Medicine website, Access Good ID. The fourth area for UDI is regarding some other reports and retention of records. So there are a number of places in your quality management system, in your other types of procedures that you have, that you do now need to make mention of UDI. So, RECOR complaints or medical device reporting for adverse events and so on. If a UDI is available for that particular product, it now needs to be included. There's some requirements for electronic record compliance, 21 CFR Part 11, and in a 3-year record retention, even after you hold the medical device off the market. So these are the four major areas. The next couple of slides give some illustration. First of all, the label. Let's take a look at that. You'll see many times the label squeezed, or the UDI squeezed into the label. It can be quite long, especially if you have all those production controls. Now, this particular example does have all those controls: a manufacturing date, an expiration date, a lot, and a serial number. And again, all those may not be present, and you might only have a few or none of those. I also want to touch on just a example of the data that needs to be reported. So this is 57 fields that are reported, and then the FDA derives some additional fields for a grand total of 64. So we won't go into all the details here, but there's a lot of identifiers about the product. There's information about the labeler and regulatory fields, safety information, information about the packaging, and also the a number of characteristics, and also a production and control type of field. So a lot of these are yes or no, and we're going to dive into this and revisit this to see what would be most applicable for Class 1 in a little bit. One other area that we want to touch on is just understanding the basic requirements is the timing. So I mentioned this 2022 September deadline. We are very close. If you look at the red arrow there, getting very close within a couple months, 10 months or so now of the compliance deadline. So we'll talk about things that need to be done a little bit later, but just FYI, this is the last wave for the FDA. And if you only manufacture Class I, I understand it's new and different, big learning curve, but we'll try to help you out. So that's the quick background, Angela. What was the next area that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, so we want to go into, you know, what is a medical device? Is my product a medical device? And how do we register and list? And Patti might have been able to join us. Patti, are you out there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. Terrific.
Oh, great.
Glad you're able to join.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patti. I'm going to ask you to jump in here. You're able to see the screen okay and everything?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So this question comes up quite frequently, Angela, and it seems to be a no-brainer, but it's actually a little bit fuzzy. When some products and accessories and various packaging levels and combination kits, and it starts to get a little bit uneasy about whether or not your product is actually an FDA-defined medical device. So we have put 5 steps here for you to follow. And unfortunately, I hear some background. I'm not sure where's that coming from, but maybe we can mute some people. But the first one is to, first of all, check against the FDA definition. Follow the link in the upper right there. It gives you some steps very similar to what you see here. And you can compare your claims about your product, your intended use, your information for use, and see how it bounces against the FDA definition. That's one of your primary functions that you need to answer. And then there's some other resources that you can dive into. There's a product classification database. You can also email or contact the Division of Industry and Consumer Education, DICE, and get some information there. This email also is free. But now you, in step number 5, you crossed over from free resources to paid resources. So you can actually submit a 513G. There's some costs there. I think it's about $5,000 or so. But you'll need to define your product. But the result of that is you will get an official FDA determination whether or not you have a medical device, and then need to comply with a number of regulations. And let's start off with those regulations. One is that you would pay a user fee. So there's a number of links here that talk about that. If you've never done that, you definitely want to do a little bit of research and understand that user fee. That is connected to registering your establishment and listing your product. So both those, number 2 and number 3, are performed on the FURL's website. This is an FDA website. It's free to access an account, and you do identify your establishment, put some contact information in, and then list your products. Once you've done this preliminary, the next question is whether or not you need to have UDI. So, Angela, I think we were going to talk about this. I can slide right into it if you want.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work on this. Definitely with some real specifics here.
So, Patti, I think there were some topics here that you wanted to bring out. Now, there are some general exceptions, and I'll just quickly mention before Patti jumps in here, that you'll find a number of general exceptions down in the appendix when you download the material. But we want to focus in on Class I exceptions. So if you're manufacturing Class I, Patti, can you give us some now information about what we need to consider? And there might be some exceptions that allow changes the way I comply with the regulations. In some cases, I don't need to, they're accepted where I don't need to do anything. So go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. So we've seen the slide just a bit before with Gary showing us before, and now this is more or less the after, right? So the FDA UDI exceptions do exist for certain Class I products. So if we look at the top left quadrant here, we have Class I with UPC label, and the UPC is accepted as UDI. Now we get into direct marking. You'll see that the Class I with UPC label, direct marking is not required. And then we have the Class I OTC, or over-the-counter. Good ID reporting is not required. And then the last quadrant we have Class I with GMP, good manufacturing practice. UDI is not required. So we do see some differences here. So we tried to put a few slides together to give you some examples of what we're talking about with regards to some of these exceptions. So we have the Class I GMP, good manufacturing practice device category. What you'll see we put here under criteria is a live link to the FDA product listing database for you. Oftentimes we get questions from clients who are asking, how do I know if my products are GMP exempt, for example? So I believe this link will prove very helpful. You'll find once you click on here, you'll be asked to put some information in. We simply used this mechanical walker as our example. You type in that device description and a bunch of information comes back to you, and lo and behold, we can see in fact that our product, our mechanical walker, is GMP exempt. So it's really very important to know that it's going to be a useful tool for you going forward. And we've got no UDI required in this case. So let's go on to the next example. So we've got the Class I with the production identifier. So here we have no production identifier required in UDI. And you'll recall when Gary was presenting on this, the UDI was the device identifier and production identifier. So here we strike out the production identifier and it's no longer required. The third device category we're talking about is the Class I UPC. Here we have the UPC can be used as the UDI on the label. No direct mark is required, but good ID reporting is required. So this looks very different than the label that Gary was presenting, much simpler as you can see. He showed a label with UDI. This shows UPC can be used as the full UDI on the label. Again, no production identifier is required.
Patti, did you want to mention something about the date? If there is a date used, many times it's not there.
Oh, yes. Yes. So the date format would remain the same. That would have to still stick.
Okay.
So we've covered the first three, and we have one more very important device category to cover. And Gary wants to share a bit more on what we're calling the consumer health product designation. Gary?
Yeah, let's dive into a little bit more detail on this particular draft guidance because it is talking about the submission of data to the Good ID. Before we open up the actual guidance and pull up some of the details, just to refresh, there's a number of data attributes that need to be reported to the Good ID. So this is the full list that we have in front of us. The difference on this particular screen is that some of those have a red font to them, and they would be required. So those obviously are always in play. And then there's a number of these that are not typically used, and we're striking them out for a Class I. So obviously you don't have a pre-market submission number, you don't have a supplement number for Class I, and that's 510K exempt. So some of these are obviously you need to consider them. Over in the left-hand side, the direct marketing Patti just mentioned would not be applicable. So in many cases, you can trim this list down to the ones that are required, and the ones then that are in black, not stricken out, are conditional. So you kind of have to look at them. If they're available, obviously you need to submit them, but in many cases, the total subset is a little bit less than in the full data set that we looked at earlier if you have a Class I product. So those particular data values are the ones that are in question. Now, the FDA recently came out, and this is recent, back in October 14th. So a few weeks ago, this guidance came out from the FDA. It's still in draft. There is a comment period, but you can go ahead and follow the link. And basically, this guidance says that if you have Class I with UDI requirements and it's a consumer health product, then you do not need to submit a data record to the FDA Good ID. You have other compliance requirements to meet, and we talked about them. And that would be the identifying a product. So that's pretty straightforward because your UPC typically used for Class I is meeting those UDI requirements for identification on the label. You still have all the reportings and the policies and the procedures to put in place, but this particular draft guidance is accepting the Good ID submission. Now, to qualify, you want to examine this rather closely. To qualify for this exclusion, you need to be, or your device needs to be 510K exempt and sold exclusively over the counter. So this is not anything for prescription. And in fact, in the lower half of the screen, the guidance carves out a number of particular device conditions that do not apply. So if you have a 510K requirement, first of all, this exclusion would not apply to that. If you had a prescription Class I, it doesn't apply to that. If you sell to the professional healthcare facilities, hospitals, clinics, and so on, and the device is intended to be used by a professional, then this exclusion would not apply. And then just to be complete, they say that the FDA indicates that Class I implantable devices, I think there's only about a few, maybe 10 or so product codes that fall into this category. It would not apply. And then the life supporting and life sustaining, I did a quick search on that product classification database. I did not actually see any Class I product codes that were life sustaining or life supporting, but the guidance still says if you fall into that category, it would not apply. And then lastly, there's about 100 or so product unclassified devices in that database where, again, this would not apply. So that's the details on this particular exception for not requiring Good ID submissions. Over the course of time, we have seen a couple other particular sectors carved out by the FDA where they have provided exclusions. So this particular slide focuses in on eyewear. And Patti, do you want to talk some of the details here about what the FDA provides as far as exceptions on eyewear?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Gary. So yeah, this particular group of products was affected by this recent guidance. And so what we see here is with spectacle lenses, prescription lenses, they're accepted, and so no UDI is required. But with spectacle frames, readers over the counter, and sunglasses, we see UDI is still required, but there's no requirement to submit any of that data to the FDA's Good ID database. Hard contact lenses, UDI is required. Soft contact lenses, however, still are on hold. I don't believe we anticipate that changing anytime soon, so we've got that marked as still on hold. And then we have finally intraocular lens. UDI is required there. The other thing I wanted to mention is that in the appendix, you'll see some more detail for UDI exceptions by product code that should prove very helpful. So let's take a look at this comparison. We wanted to put this slide together because lots of our customers are selling in many other markets outside of the US. So it's really important to take a look at your product portfolio holistically so that you can really see, maybe I'm not impacted in this particular region, but certainly I should be aware of any mandates that are going to impact my products in another region. And noteworthy is one in particular, sunglasses, which was a category that was previously required. Today, UDI is required, but no submissions to the Good ID database. And yet we see in the EU, it's considered personal protective equipment, and its device UDI does not apply. So you can see it's a very distinct difference between how each particular mandate is handling these products. Something to keep in mind as you look to plan globally. So once again, we're looking at the regulation comparison. I won't read through all of them, but between the FDA and the US. But there are some differences that you want to be mindful of. So for example, there's not an equivalent GMP or good manufacturing practice exemption in the EU as we see in the US. Once again, the takeaway is just be mindful as you evaluate your portfolio and that you're careful to make sure you've got all of your angles covered. So we wanted to put a few examples together for you. We've had clients asking recently as they're undertaking this project, well, so which types of products would fall into these categories? So let's start with the FDA Class I examples in the professional setting. These require UDI. Some of the examples would include hospital beds, stethoscopes, dental instruments, and dental equipment such as chairs. Then on the other end of the spectrum, we have consumer or over-the-counter use. So we have humidifiers and sunglasses and readers and frames that we talked about on the previous slide. Electric toothbrushes, we've got water picks and pill crushers. Those require UDI, but no Good ID reporting is required for this group of products. And then we have what I refer to as a hybrid. There's a cross use here. So you've got products that are sold into both the professional setting as well as your local pharmacy. Some of those examples include examination gloves, dental floss, first aid kits, and even Band-Aids where UDI is required. And then finally, we have our low risk group of our GMP, Good Manufacturing Practice exempt products. Some of those examples include lenses, ankle braces, our walkers that we referred to earlier, canes, and even scales.
Yeah, no.
So how do I, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about compliance. It looks like we have quite a few questions that are really specific as well.
Okay. So we get this question a lot, you know, how do we begin? Where do we begin? Folks are not sure, especially if they're a Class I manufacturer that has not yet had experience. So we always like to say it's important to start with an implementation plan, right? Who's going to be responsible for UDI in your organization? That's not always an easy question to answer, as most of our regulatory professionals are very busy with lots of tasks. So it is important to identify some folks that will be responsible for that activity. When you look at step 2 and 3 and 5, RETEC is really instrumental in these areas. We want to educate our clients on what's required, what types of data elements are they required to identify and then collect, and then give them a tool, a template, if you will, to begin that collection process. Help them set up their FDA and ESG accounts, certainly. And then once we get to the submission phase, verify that the data has been properly submitted and published. And then finally, at the end of all of this, you'll be able to start production and maintain that data, and then hopefully prepare for that international UDI requirement, as that will require a bit more work as well. We did put together a very simplistic timeline. Now, we recognize that you may have already taken some of these activities, but you may not have. And so it's important to recognize some of the areas that you need to get moving on. We started this in December, but certainly with about 10 months to go, there's much work to be done. And we highly recommend that you start as soon as you're able to do so. So checking off some of these boxes, taking a look and highlighting what you've already covered is a great exercise to undertake, and then move forward from there. So we are also aware that you have options, in terms of selecting a way and a means to get this data into the FDA's Good ID database in this example. So there's manual entry, there's build your own solution as ReTech has done, which is very, very expensive, and you need quite a bit of internal resources to do so. Buying a solution or renting a solution. And ReTech certainly falls into that last category as a hosted software solution. And there are, just be aware, advantages and disadvantages to all of these options. Some are more costly and time consuming, and others can be laden with several transcription errors we hear from our clients as well. So how can ReTech help? So this is a very simplistic visual of how we're working together with our clients today. It's important to see just what we do. The first thing we do is we identify the manufacturer and what their particular needs are. So when we talk about the type of education that might be needed, if you're a Class III or Class II manufacturer, you may not need as much information in detail as a Class I manufacturer. So we want to do that evaluation and give you that support in terms of what it is that you'll need to do. Identify those data elements that are required by the FDA. Look at the systems that you have that you're working with. We are aware that many of our clients work within many systems, so product lifecycle management systems, master data management systems, and beyond. And that's okay. We've purposefully built in a lot of flexibility into our solution so that we're still able to get that data from behind your firewall into our single source platform and really begin to go to work on cleansing your data, validating that data, transforming that data, remembering that the business rules of the health authority have been built into this solution. So the end game is that your data is pristine and ready to be submitted on to the FDA, the EU, China, and South Korea. And finally, we also have a means to support our clients with GDSN, or Global Data Synchronization Network, submission of data for their trading partners downstream. The National Health Service of the UK is one example. GPOs here in the States, other hospital networks are requiring that data be submitted in this fashion. So this should give you a nice overview of just what we do in terms of where we begin and where we end up with your data. And so we talked about what is UDI, what needs to be done. We know that the deadline is coming, so we just would like to finish up with the solution benefits that ReTech offers. Certainly, when you're choosing a vendor, it's very important to pick someone who is reliable. We are a proven data management system. We've been doing this since the onset of this mandate, so certainly tremendous experience in this area. You need to pick something that's cost effective. We hear this every day. Our clients are saying, budgets are getting tight. How do we maintain this? How do we find a solution that is cost effective? Well, we can tell you ReTech's solution is very cost effective. And additionally, we will save those IT resources. I talk to clients often that tell me they are challenged in getting internal resources for IT because they're just strapped in, they're working on so many projects. We also provide for automated bulk submissions, which saves tremendous time and money. When we talk about time efficiency, working with ReTech is a very quick, very fast startup. We begin with some onboarding and some training and the tools to find your data, and it happens very quickly. And that's important. Some of the other options we described, that's not the case. We have the capability of reusing your data, merging your data, transforming your data. All of these activities will save you and your team a lot of time. Compliant. Yes, of course, we are compliant. That's a critical piece in all of this. Data security and integrity is of utmost importance to ReTech. We're 21 Part 11 compliant. We are Annex 11 compliant for the EU as well. You have audit trail reporting here in this solution, which is critical when you are audited. A flexible solution. This is very flexible. It's a cloud-based software solution. We're not coming into your organization and making any changes to your equipment. Very easy to implement. And future-proof. I mentioned earlier The majority of our clients are selling products everywhere. And so it's important for them to have more than a point solution for each of these regions that they're impacted by. Ours is a scalable system that allows for reusability and for the ability to reach those future global channels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patti. Great details there. And just a reminder that we definitely will email out a link to the recording and the slides. Some folks have asked about that. And we do have quite a few questions. So we've got some time left here to do a Q&A. So Gary and Patti, I guess I will just launch into question one. And this is one that we get quite a bit. If I already have a label on my product, say I'm in the EU, do I need a new label for the US? And kind of vice versa, that question as well. If I'm already US, do I need a new label for the EU?
I can take a quick stab at that and then Patti jump in. Many times the desire is that you have, quote, a universal label or a common label for both the US, FDA, and in some cases other regions. The identifier, let's first talk about the UDI identifier that would be required on that label, certainly now for the US and then very soon for the European Union, those deadlines come into play. But the UDI itself, the identifier is global. So yes, you are able to use the very same identifier in the US, in the EU, and actually in any health authority that recognizes that particular standard. So GS1, HIBIC, ICC, BBA, all three of those are recognized in both regions that we talked about. So you can use that very same identifier. Now, when it comes to the other components on the label, you have to be a little bit cautious because some regions have their own rules. So in Europe, if you're importing data, you know, like a foreign manufacturer and importing data, you'll need a European representative. So this authorized reps, you'll need an EC rep identifier on the label. You will also need a CE mark on the label. Both of those that I just mentioned are not applicable to the US. So some companies try to walk down that path where they have a universal label and they find that sometimes they can pull it off. But as you start to expand the number of regions that you try to use that general label for, many times the regional requirements start to pile up and now you don't have room on your label to accommodate all. So there's some also some language requirements in the European Union medical device regulation that come into play. So the quick answer is the UDI is able to be used globally, no problem there. But when it comes to the other components, it's going to start to crowd your label. I would highly recommend, obviously, there's good efficiencies and being able to use a common label. But Patti, did you have any thing to add there from customers that you talked to?
Yeah, no, and we often get that question, Gary. It is something that comes up all the time. And to your point, you do get crowding, and so you've got to be very careful when you're looking at creating that universal label and whether you can actually do that.
Yeah, one other thought. Sometimes companies use this particular regulation to be the trigger that causes them to switch over to a two-dimensional barcode. Though the advantage of that is the two-dimensional is much smaller, it's less real estate, and but you kind of have to watch it to make sure that your downstream users, your customers, are able to read that two-dimensional barcode. And if they're only set up for a UPC linear barcode, that you might have a problem there. But it is something as an option to consider going to two-dimensional. It's so much more of a dense type of symbology that you can put a lot more information in it and over and above UDI actually into a very small space. So Angela, what's the next question there?
I think we've answered this, but the unclassified devices, what's the compliance timing? It's the same as the class ones, right?
Yes, absolutely. So there are some unclassified devices that are now rolled into the same timing as the Class I. So they're not exempt from everything. They still need to comply. So if you do have a medical device that's unclassified, you will need to change or update the label to UDI compliance.
Okay. Let's see. Are we saying that no PI is needed on Class I devices, both in the label and on the direct part marking, even if there are PIs on the label in text?
That would be correct. So the exclusion is that for Class Is, there's no production identifier component required at all for UDI, and then that would be applicable to the label as well as direct marking if you had a direct marking requirement. Yeah.
Okay. Here's one about a very specific scenario. If you have a collection device that can be attached to a Class II device, but does not need to contact skin. So an example would be a collection bag for a catheter. Would that still be a Class I? It's a
Yeah. So
used with a Class II.
We start to get into systems or convenience kits, as the FDA refers to them, where you have multiple medical devices that are packaged and distributed together. The timing of the UDI for those particular scenarios are driven by the most risky device. So if I manufactured a convenience kit and it had some Class II products in it and some Class I products in it, the high risk Class II would drive my compliance date, and that's actually years earlier. So I should have already complied with UDI. Now, if you have a Class I that is sold on its own, obviously you have till September 24th of next year, 2022, to comply with UDI because it's Class I. But you do have this, kind of crossover where they're kind of mixed together. But the general rule is that the higher risk device drives the compliance date. And, we're glad to talk about an individual scenario, if you connect up with us later. I think there's also some emails and phone numbers down here in the bottom at the end of the PowerPoint that you can refer to.
Yep. Okay, the next one is kind of a comment about the UPC. So that is a GS1 US term, and that using an EAN-13 to capture the G1013 assigned by other GS1 member organizations meets this requirement. So I think a question has been coming up from GS1 UK members asking if they need a UPC specifically for the US market, and that is not the case.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, Patti, do you talk to some of your clients that have this question, and are they mostly foreign-based?
Mostly foreign-based. We don't get it as much as you think, but when we do, it is foreign-based, absolutely.
Yeah, it's my understanding that UPC is primarily used in North America, certainly US, Canada, and Mexico. But when you go to other regions, the EAN, originally a European article number, but now it's technically the international number. But the EAN adds another digit to the front end of a UPC. So a UPC is 12 digits long, and the EAN symbology format has 13 digits. So the indicator digit or the digit in the front points to a particular country. Both of those are GS1 standards. So they're allowed, FDA recognizes them as a GSA or GS1 standard. So it's no problem to use them in the US if you would like to use EAN. When you go to Europe, obviously EAN is by default the standard in the retail industry. So you have 13 digits there. For most business to business, there is a 14-digit referred to as a G1014 that is used by default. So now all those 14 digits are now able to capture information about the particular packaging level. So G1014. So all three, UPC, EN, and the G1014, are able to be put on labeling. Now, when it comes to the exclusions, I don't know that the FDA actually specifically mentioned EAN. I believe you could make a strong argument that it would apply because the exclusion is for retail business and it just points to the UPC, but we might want to dive into that a little bit deeper before we give a full answer on whether or not EAN would qualify for the exclusions. Off the top of my mind, I believe it certainly would. So I think that kind of addresses the question. We can dive into a little bit more if you want to talk one-on-one.
Okay. Let's talk about good ID registration.
Angela, I'm just sorry. I wanted to add one other little thought.
Oh, sure.
There might be confusion there when you report the UPC and the EN format to the FDA Good ID. So the way that the submission occurs is that you put leading zeros, you pack additional zeros on the front end to create a full 14-digit number. So the FDA only does require 14 digits to be submitted. It does not mean that you need to change anything on your label. You still keep the UPC, the 12 digits. And if you're using EN, you still use 13. But when it comes time to reporting, full 14 digits are required. So you simply pack leading zeros to it. Those leading zeros do not affect the check digit at the end. But we do that as automatic type of transformation. If someone gives us a 13-character UPC or 12-character UPC, we go ahead and pack 2 zeros on the front to actually submit it. So sometimes that comes up in the conversation. People think that they have to change their to some 14-digit representation on their label for UPC, and that is not the case. So sorry, we can go to the next question.
No, good point. Good point. Let's see. Is good ID registration required if UDI is applied to an unclassified device in advance of the September 2022 deadline? I think the answer is yes, right? If you're applying UDI, you should go ahead.
Yeah, there's registration. Patti, I think you've had some customers that comply early, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I always say when they talk about the deadline, you're not prevented from submitting this information early, and it's always a good practice to do so when you're able. So many have submitted their Class 1s early.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's okay to go ahead and comply, meaning change the identifier on your label, add UDI, make sure it's compliant, and also to report to the Good ID early, and that's actually advised so that at some point in time you have to throw the switch and stop distributing product that is non-UDI compliant and start the production flow of product that is UDI compliant. So many times that's identified by changes on the label, obviously, but you have, as a checkpoint, a criteria, a prerequisite is that you also have submitted that record. So that record has to be submitted to the FDA basically before you start distribution. I think there's a little bit of a grace period for very first entries, but yeah, so you can do all that early on, and we actually highly recommend doing that. When it gets near the end, close to the compliance deadline, we have seen a slowdown in the response at the FDA and being able to accept the volume. So obviously you want to avoid that. The help desk gets overloaded at the FDA, but we just encourage a early compliance.
All right. Here's a broad question. What advice would you give to a startup company, less than 5 employees, who contracts all manufacturing?
So that's a good one, Patty. We jump into this scenario quite a bit, right? Where we have, you talk to a number of companies that contract out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times the contract manufacturers are unsure at first whether they have responsibility to do the submission, but really the FDA calls out very specifically, Gary, that it's a labeler or relabeler that has that responsibility to submit the data to the FDA's good ID.
Yeah. So in this case, you might have a private label distributor and a contract manufacturer in a business agreement, and the private label distributor, really doesn't have any manufacturing facilities at all, and just by agreement, they have actual product manufactured at another site, different company. So the way the regulations stand is that the contract manufacturer has no UDI legal responsibility. The burden falls on the private label distributor. The contracting company has UDI requirements. They need to comply. Now, sometimes the way that actually fleshes out is that the private label distributor has either a verbal, preferably a written agreement for the contract manufacturer to act on their behalf and to submit the data record to the good ID. And that's very common. It's just a matter, of course, of doing business. They want to offload it. Private label distributor wants to offload it to the contractor manufacturer, and that's certainly able to be done. If you have that scenario, we'll talk a little bit. There's some good recommendations and practices in the way you set up the FDA account. But and the other aspect is many times the private label distributor will not actually apply the label to the product. They, again, have the contracting manufacturer, either by some specification or instruction, actually create the label and apply it to the product, but it's all under the direction of the private label distributor. So the bottom line is contract manufacturer does not have any legal UDI responsibilities according to regulation, but in many cases, the practical side of this business is that they actually do the work. But the FDA is going to come to the private label distributor and ask for evidence of how you do it, how you comply in the event that there's a inspection or evaluation.
Right. I think we've got time maybe for one more question. And if we did not answer your question, we will certainly get back to you individually. Thank you so much for submitting those. What specific information is required to be encoded for the direct marking barcode?
So the direct marking barcode, the FDA does require that the full UDI be put on the product. So in the event that it has a direct mark, or excuse me, a device identifier portion and a production identifier, both of those, the full UDI has to be presented. And again, remember, many times it's accepted by various clauses that the FDA put out, or it may not even be used. For example, you might have a product that doesn't have any lot or serial number to be included, or any of those production controls. So, but whatever the UDI is, has to be fully represented. Now, there is a clause that says in the regulation that says if you're running out of space, you can pick either the human readable or the barcode. You can save some space by doing one format versus the other. It's your choice, so you can use either one. The other thing that comes into play is that there are some general exclusions in the event that it's way too small, and it's basically technology is not sufficient to actually put that barcode on the product itself. So there's one other exclusion that I'll quickly mention, is that you don't need to do that in the event it degrades the safety and the performance of the product. So by putting maybe a laser etched identifier on a product makes it so weak. Now it's a safety issue. You can claim some of those. So we'd be glad to share some of those exclusions if you have particular direct marking questions.
All right. Well, we're out of time. As always, if you have specific scenarios, you want to talk UDI, health authority questions, please get in touch with us. Email us at meddevice@readtech.com. There's our phone number. We have lots of information and webinar recordings like this available to view on readtech.com. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. Great questions. And an email will be coming your way to review the materials. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks all.